What good is a database without data? Well, not really useful. Which is why we're going to we're going to try and populate our sample database with data on today's chapter of Data Bard. Data Bard, 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 Data Bard. Dabba 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 dabba, hoi hoi hoi. Alright, so we're continuing our series on SSMS Copilot, and if you remember from our last video, check the channel, check for a playlist, and I'll have the information out there for that. We were able to create a couple of database tables with foreign key relationships, primary keys, and other columns within our database. But all we did was we created the structure. We didn't put any data in it. Now we're going to test the possibility of what is it like interacting with SSMS Copilot to create data. Obviously, you're probably not going to do this a whole lot in a production environment, but if you're working in test environments or otherwise demonstration environments where you might need to mock up data, this is a useful scenario to cover. So we're going to cover that here with some prompts, and let's see what we can do as far as creating data in our database. Alright, here we go. Test data. Let's see what happens. So, I've got a connection into my database, brand new prompt window, and I haven't started up a query against the database, so let's go ahead and right click. We'll hit new query. Let's do a good old at SQL query 2. So now SSMS Copilot has access into viewing our database. And for sake of argument here, we're going to focus on the initial 4 tables that we created. The dimension and fact tables we created, will come back to that at a later video. So let's just try and create some data. Now this is where, again, SSMS Copilot, we'd like things to be simple. If we're having to write super advanced things where we basically have to tell it exactly what to do, might not be much different from creating an insert statement. So let's see if we can give it a prompt to be able to allow it to create data. So first of all, we'll shift to read write with approval, because I still want to at least see the queries and I want to approve them, but otherwise I want to give my Copilot the ability to write data to my database. Under assumption that typically we need to start with more referential type data first, and then we need to do transactional data after the fact. We're not going to start with sales transactions. We'll start with employees. Actually, you know what? Let's start with regions, because employees are going to roll up into regions. So create, we'll say 50 records for dbo.regions. Simple enough. Let's see what it'll do. Alright, it's thinking. Alright, let's see what it gives us. So to insert 50 records, dbo.regions table, you can use the following script as a template. Replace the placeholder values with your desired data. Okay. At least our region structure is region ID, region name, region country. Okay, so we could do that. That's not pretty though. Where nobody defines their regions region name 1. They name it north, south, east, west. And countries are, they're not just countries. So let's see if we can refine this. Create 50 records for dbo.region. Region names should reference cardinal coordinates, which serve as the basis for region definitions, or can also reference specific regions in the United States, such as Midwest. We want to make sure we get that one right. Yeah, Midwest. countries should be populated with actual country that exist in the world today. Second one here. All right, let's take a look. All right, looks a little bit better. So we've at least got more options here as far as values here. The United States looks good. So we've got north, south, east, west, United States, Midwest, northeast, southeast, southwest, northwest. Well, it did follow the prompt as expected. Except then it basically replicates the same thing for each. So we've got a North Canada, South Canada, East, West. So this is at least a step up. The data makes a little more sense. We have more geographies represented. Brazil, United Kingdom, Germany, France, Australia, India, China, Japan. Okay, then it just copies north, south, east, west. Alright, kind of nice. Nah, but that's not really that pretty. What can we do to enhance this? So let's take another one that I pre-scripted here as more of an advanced approach to this. Let's see how it deals with this. We'll still say 100 region records into the regions table. Use realistic names for regions such as Northwest, Southeast, Midwest, or even city-level or international names like Berlin, Tokyo, or Sao Paulo. If this table is expected to be more limited, insert fewer distinct names, but duplicate them with varied IDs or subregions. To get to 100 rows, include appropriate values for if those exist. Use the equal insert statements. Alright, so we're going to give it more context for things. United States, Northwest, Southeast, Southwest. Alright, gave us some different geographies there. That's kind of nice. Chicago, Houston. Yep, I would expect those to be broken up. We apparently operate in Germany. So we've got some Germany's Munich, Hamburg, Frankfurt, Cologne. Some Japan options, Brazil. So obviously it's keying off of the fact of specific geographies that were listed within the prompt. So because we listed Berlin, Tokyo, Sao Paulo, we now innately do we now do business within Germany, Japan, or Brazil. So the key here is examples are important to give it that appropriate context. And in some cases like this, if you wanted to generate geography data, give it some actual indications of the geographies you expect to work in. And that gives us some good options here. And at least at this point, as long as we keep things geography driven, that makes it pretty easy to do this. If we were to do this through other definitions, such as Northwest District 1 and 2, alright, now I'm going to have to make sure I'm crystal clear on what those mean. We'll call that a pretty good start here, though. So I'm going to go ahead and insert that in here. Let's run that. Oh. Well, it's not going to let us insert that because guess what? We're trying to insert into an identity field, and it didn't catch that. So adjust this. Alright. Equal insert statements, and assume that the primary key for the table is populated by an identity. This should mean it should be smart enough to know that it doesn't have to populate the field, we'll just let it iterate. There we go. Looks a little bit better. Okay. Let's get rid of our statement here. Let's insert that in. Lo and behold, we have 100 records. Good. Let's continue that with our other tables. This is the part we'll probably speed through this as far as editing goes. So, behold, fast forward, we're inserting data. Insert 1000 records into dbo.employees. If I remember correctly, employees do have a region ID. Need a region ID with random existing values in dbo.regions. ID be populated for all but one record. That record will have the position of CEO. Yeah, and this is where, okay, a prompt like that isn't going to work very well, because look at what it's doing here. First name, last name, it's just going to be iterating. So it's going to be first name 1, first name 2, last name 1, last name 2. And if it's the first one, then it's CEO, else it's an employee. Technically it works, but again, is that really all you want for test data? Probably not unless you're doing bulk testing. So I'm going to take this prompt that I wrote, which I prepared earlier. Let's have a take a look at this. Insert realistic employee records into the employees table. Use a variety of real first and last names like Jermel, Marie O'Connor. Make sure email fields follow consistent patterns like first.last.company.com. Use higher date values spread over the last 15 years. If there's a region ID, foreign key ensured maps to valid regions. Tells the job department info if available. We can enhance this for departments like HR, payroll, finance, sales, and engineering. No, let's do IT and engineering. One moment. So again here, I'm assuming that this appropriate job titles and department info isn't going to work well because it's very generic about a definition. So let's give it examples. Like HR, sales, finance, payroll, IT, and engineering. Manager ID should also point to other records than dbo.employees with one record having a no value and the position of CO. Attempt distribution assuming the company has a hierarchical structure, meaning there are VPs, corporate officers, and middle managers. Let's give that a go. Alright, values. So things like first name. Alright, we've got 10 unique combinations thereof. It's gonna have duplicates though, which isn't necessarily great. Or else we're gonna have Taylor Walker as everybody else. I guess Taylor Walker's a nice enough name. And then we're gonna have 10 VPs, 40 corporate officers, 150 middle managers, and everybody else is gonna be an employee. Okay, let's refine this further. Each first and last name combination must be unique. We want everybody to have some uniqueness there. Should reflect the department they are a part of. Also assume sales will have regional managers, their sales teams. So I might need to pull out the source and think about, I think the term realistic isn't necessarily providing any benefit here. And it went back to the first name, last name nomenclature, so that's not any better. Cannot contain numbers. You can't iterate through it. That's not fair, Copilot. Try again. Let's see what else those do. Well, it generates that. Go to CEO. Okay, that is doing complex case statements. Which I suppose isn't too bad, because at least that part we're not having to write it out. It doesn't necessarily have a lot of creativity here. So not exactly the greatest. Alright, let's see what it did this time. Ooh, interesting. So it is trying to keep things unique, but in terms of just picking first names and last names, we've got our list up here of possible names, and then it's using a new ID, which in SQL environments isn't all that uncommon. New ID generates a new GUID value each time it runs. That guarantees at least some uniqueness there for each record. That is going to pick one at random. And the regional stuff looks decent. Alright, let's go ahead and use that. Okay, did not like the... Yeah, I think that's at least what we need there if we're going to have O'Connor. For sake of keeping our data simple, we're going to do... No, actually, let's give ourselves a tails. Email. No! Our employee table doesn't have emails. Yeah, that's not important. Let's fix that. Add a email column to employees account for typical So it's interesting that it did that. I don't know if I necessarily call that a hallucination or not, but that is an interesting point here. I told it to generate information for a column that didn't technically exist in the table, and yet it still tried to generate a script that allowed us to create the value. I mean, obviously good database design, that shouldn't necessarily be a concern, but it is interesting to note that one of the ways you can make your Copilot hallucinate is by telling it that certain columns exist that don't actually exist in your database structure. Probably could have added in a extra statement in there that says, for any of the instructions that I gave you, make sure you check that the database actually has columns that align with what is here. We'll call that okay for right now. Let's do that. Like that. Looks good. Okay. Now, let's see, can you run? Alright, ran successfully. Let's do a select star from employees. Let's see what we got for employee records. So our CEO is named Hiroshi Johnson, Win Martinez. We have multiple VPs in the areas. Okay, that could be cleaned up a bit. Corporate officers, obviously you wouldn't have that many, but we'll say it's a we like having middle management layers between things, so let's say that's acceptable for right now. Middle managers, it just said middle manager directly. Of course it did. And then we've got regional sales managers, where region is an ID, which just has a number associated to it, so it just did a random number there. What did it do for the position name? Last name. Oh yeah, it just appended the region ID. But at least with random being as it is, it did what I was worried about and what we would have expected to have happen, which is, let's see, email, salary, select top region. So the one thing that was lost on this, and we would need to, but we could adjust our statement for this further, is it tried to define the title of the sales manager by pulling a top one at the same time that it was pulling the region ID as well. That explains why we are getting a region ID of 9 here in the name, 36 here. So that's more random generation. We could give it a little bit more guidance here to fix that. The other thing to note here too is notice it gave us a hierarchy, but we didn't formally define the hierarchy, it just determined it. And granted, this is a crude way, it knows what it's generating as far as the number of CEOs, the number of VPs, but it was at least making sure that VPs report to the CEO, which would we expect to see. Corporate officers report to VPs. Middle managers report to corporate officers, and employees report to middle managers. So at least we do have a hierarchy, if we care about it. Not exactly the prettiest hierarchy, but it does work in a pinch. Alright, let's populate the other two, and we're going to use some pre-populated scripts that I had here. So let's see, next we'll do products. Use real product naming conventions. Okay, so we're going to sell a whole bunch of different products. We're going to sell ergonomic chairs, soap, and wireless headsets. This is a prompt that was generated by prompts, so this is always fun to see what it came up with. Populator fields like there with possible values. Yeah, we'll go for that. Let's see what happens. Okay, similar issues to the others. It is not all that imaginative in terms of coming up with new things. But also we give it a fairly generic prompt and just said, well, we pretty much give it the values that it had in the prompt. Each record's name should be unique. You cannot use integers. We're learning from our previous ones. You cannot use integers to uniquely define product names. Let's see if it can come up with something there. Price is coming up with a random number. That's good for right now. We have one category per, and then stock. That's fine. Okay. Okay, so you're not using integers, but what are you using? An iterative value, you're modulating it, and it's gonna insert special characters. Oh, I'm honestly curious to see if this is gonna work or not. So it's using the character function, which in this case it's going to be passing it an integer value, which means it should be referencing specific characters within the possible collation that exists within the database. I don't expect the data to necessarily make sense, but I'm curious to see if this will actually do it. Let's test it. Alright. Ran without issue. Let's see what we've got for products. Select star from products. Let's order it by product name. AML, BML, CML. Yep, so just iterating, and it's iterating through the alphabet. So it didn't completely solve for the problem. But I'll say it's a pretty creative idea. I will give it kudos for that in that, oh yeah, and 26 makes sense because it's just iterating through the characters of the English alphabet. I mean, well, it did listen to me. I didn't allow it to use integers. But now it's essentially using characters as integers, so Copilot is cheating. It's rude. Okay, it worked. But we'll call that good, at least for an initial pass. Alright, finally, sales transactions. Let's get this one in here. Again, pre-prepared prompt for this. 1,000 realistic sales transaction records. Insurance row includes a valid employee product ID and region ID by referencing IDs from previously inserted tables. ID cannot, but we don't want to give our corporate executives the fact that they did sales. So employee ID cannot reference records with positions of CEO, VP. Actually, not of, like. Let's see if it at least corporate officers and middle managers. Use transaction date values distributed over the last 3 years with sales quantities between 1 and 25 units. Include realistic sales amount values derived from the related product's price. Maintain foreign key integrity. Let's see if it's smart enough to know how to reference our stuff here. Ooh. It's gonna be smart enough to know. So an interesting thing to call out there, it was writing its query where it wasn't just checking employee and product for IDs. For product, it was actually said it was checking for pricing values. So we're iterating again, we're doing cursors. I don't like doing cursors a lot, but this is one of the situations where a cursor's okay. Run transaction data in the last 3 years. Okay, so it's gonna give us random transaction dates, which is good. Top product, it's gonna pick random values there. See, employee ID, it's gonna do the same. Although that's going to fail because the CEO is going to be the only one that doesn't get a value. The rest of them will. I think. Region IDs. Quantity and total amount. Okay, and this is where it's going to run into the same issue as the last one. So this might be a situation where to generate this data, you might actually want to break it into 2 separate prompts, because one is dependent on the other. I think if I were to rewrite this, I would want to write this as 2 separate prompts. One that would create the records themselves and would define the product that's being sold on the transaction. The second prompt would then say, take a look at the pricing information available for the products using the foreign key relationship and come up with a price that makes sense. Without that, I'm expecting this is going to give us prices all over the board. This is test data, so it's kind of cute to do that. Let's hit insert. It did that. And you know what? We're going to run this a couple of times. We're going to run it 5 times because I want 5,000 records. Okay, did that. 3. 4. And I know I could just change the iterator, but I'm trying to not modify the code itself unless I absolutely need to, because that at least lets us check how Copilot does on its own. Alright. We've got 5,000 records, so select star from dvo.sales transactions. Transaction ID. Alright, so obviously our prices are really expensive. But it generated things all the same. Did IDs, which product IDs are within the range of 1 to 1,000, which would make sense. Same so hold true for employee ID. Regions were within the 100 or within the 10s there. That's good. Quantities and the values there. Clearly, when we're selling things like, let's see, write a debug query. Not a debug query. Write a query that joins sales transactions to region, employee, and product to return region name, name and country. Employee to return, let's see, first name, last name, and position, and product to return, I forget what we had in our product. Product name and category. Everything from sales transactions. So we want all the columns for sales transactions, then join sales transactions to the other tables. Not a complicated query, but as long as it writes things appropriately, names things, and at least gives me a base query to work with. Okay, we got those joins in there. Not bad for a first pass. Let's execute. Okay, so when we sell 3 eco bottles of the IML version of it, those 3 bottles total are worth 20 grand in US dollars. These bottles better be made out of like platinum or something, because without that, that price is a little bit crazy. Soap is not worth 37. Smart home devices for 17 products, 30 grand, maybe a little bit high. Oh gosh, those ergonomic chairs. 5 ergonomic chairs for almost 100 grand. Alright, we're gonna have fun with this. Let's see if we can find out, based on a random generation of data, who is our top salesperson. So based on sales in dvo.sales transactions, who is our, no, let's do top 10. Who are our top 10 sales based on sales, let's see, based on total amount, who are our top 10 salespeople? How much did they sell? And in what region and country do they do sales in? Alright, our top 10. Okay, it's doing a top 10. I guess technically it works. Personally, I like writing a CTE here and then pulling the top 10 from that because it makes it a little bit easier to debug. But it's a difference of writing a CTE and commenting out top 10. It's about a horse apiece. Let's insert this. And our top 10 salespeople are Carlos Walker. Good job. You sold $257,000 worth of bottles and economy chairs and all of that within the past 3 years. For the Northwest region, nice job. Sophia, you did pretty well too. Alright, there we go. We got our top 10 salespeople. Congratulations, you are all getting test salary bonus data. Maybe we'll evolve the data at some point and let you get some salary boosts there. Ooh, actually, that might be an interesting one. We'll capture that in a future video. Took a bit, but here we go. We have test data in a bunch of our tables. Yay! Alright, second video done, and we've got test data in the environment. Let's reflect on that experience. Couple of areas where the prompts that we provided were probably a little bit too complicated for a single prompt to do what we wanted it to do, so breaking our prompts into separate steps probably would have benefited us a little bit better. Also, in terms of specificity, really important, but I think a lot of times what we found was, while Copilot does follow what you tell it to do, it's also going to try and find the easiest path to do it. So generating unique data that looks like real data, it can't easily do unless it actually involves numbers that are going to iterate, and at that point it's just going to iterate in whatever way it can, either by numbers or when I wouldn't let it use numbers, it found a different way to iterate. It's a logical algorithm. This shouldn't be surprising. It would be nice if it had a little bit more context about what's going on in the industry, and maybe with a little bit of additional development on the prompt side, we could have maybe given it some more context to figure out this is where you would get said context from. Like maybe if there is I don't know if there's a database out there of just names, that might be something that helps. In any case, it did well. We asked it to generate data, it generated data according to our parameters, and if we wanted to, we could take some additional time to alter things further, and that's where we could take things in terms of next step of generating data. Let's update the data that's in the environment, let's delete data in the environment. Given the time that this took, we'll move that on to a different video to talk about that. Brings us to the end of the video. Thank you for watching, and I hope that this is helpful and maybe a fun little experiment to watch in your spare time. If you're enjoying this, and if you have more things you want to see from me, hit that subscribe button. As always, hit that like button so that other people learn about that this video series is going on and you can see what SSMS Copilot can do. If you have specific things you would like me to test with SSMS Copilot using this demo environment, let me know in the comments and I will put those things into future videos. The time is now. Put that information in there and let's put SSMS Copilot through the paces. For now, I'm Data Bard and I'll see you in the next chapter.